La la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. The words aren't hard. Ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. But if you want to add some words, they're on 342. Ma gadlu ma'asecha ya. How great are your thoughts, O God. Ma'od, how great are your deeds and how deep are your thoughts. Me'od amku machshevotecha. Ma gadlu ma'asecha ya. Me'od amku machshevotecha. Ma gadlu ma'asecha ya. Me'od amku machshevotecha. Now I'm going to give you a parko. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I need your voices. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I can't hear you. Hallelujah. 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 Keep it going. Hallelujah. Mahasechaya. Me'od amku machshevotecha. Magalu mahasechaya. Me'od amku machshevotecha. One last time. Hallelujah. 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 Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are blessed this Friday with the presence of Andrew Lenk, with whom I've had the joy of sharing the last hour plus. He'll be accompanying us on our prayer journey, which is going to move into Yedid Nefesh, page 10, right there in the middle. Yedid Nefesh means the heart's delight. We're trying to shake off any dust from the week and leap into the peace and beauty and love that is Shabbat. Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh av harachaman. Yedid Nefesh av harachaman. Meshach avdecha, ya la 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 la, el retzonecha. Meshach avdecha, ya la 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 la, el retzonecha. Third line, we're gonna run. Yarutz avdecha, Yishtachave ya la la ya la 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 el mulada recha. Yishtachave ya la la ya la 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 el mulada recha. So take a breath. Thank you, Stu, who does everything, including opening the windows. Maybe the AC will come on at some point, but it's all right. This is a special evening because we get to not only be together on Shabbat and be in this little oasis of peace, but we get to hear some of the reflections of those who went on the civil rights journey with me just a few weeks ago. And so those reflections will be sprinkled throughout the service. And I'll offer just a few closing thoughts. But this is a chance, you can have very, very important experiences, but you need to metabolize them. You need to make them part of who you are so you can bring whatever insights into the world. So it's a beautiful opportunity to have the members of the trip here and to be able to share that. And 2 of the members of the trip have been afflicted with COVID. They're doing okay, but we wanted to make sure that they were part of the experience. And so we're going to invite them to light Shabbat candles online. So switch over to Jen and Len. And anyone who was on the trip, please join me as we light the candles here in the room together. So if you are on the civil rights trip or have a granddaughter with you, she can come and we're going to light the candles. So you know who you are. Come on up, civil rights. And go ahead, Jen and Len. We'll just follow your lead.
I'll follow her lead.
Okay. Light and then we bless. Light, earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Continuing on page 12, Lechu Neranena. I'm standing in the best place. I have the open door. Page 12. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzur yishenu, nekad mafanav toda. Naria, naria, letzur yishenu, Bizmirot narialo, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena, l'Adonai. And page 13. Yismechu Hashamayim. Oh, I didn't even tell you where the cantor is. The cantor is at a retreat, a wonderful Kulanu 6th grade retreat. So that's a beautiful new fruit of our combined efforts with Temple Israel. So he's off at Camp Ramah having a Shabbat experience under the Shamayim. So let us make them sing. We're on the very bottom paragraph of 13. Yismechu. Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, v'tahagel haaretz. And again, Yismechu Hashamayim, Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim v'tahagel haaretz. Yiramayam, Yiramayam, Yiramayam umelo. Yiramayam, Yiramayam, Yiramayam umelo. Yismechu hayam, Yiramayam, Yiramayam umelo. Yiramayam, Yiramayam, Yiramayam umelo. So that Yismachu, it's like it's a liturgy that's full of energy and strength and joy and power. And well, actually, we have many members of our trip that kind of epitomize that. But Alice Fernari has another level of energy. So she is going to be our first presenter, and she's going to be sharing some images. So 1 second. So before you begin, actually, let's do it this way.
I just want to give credit to
Here.
David Orner, who did the PowerPoint for me, because I didn't have time to make it in my busy work schedule. And he just texted me that he hopes you all enjoy it. And he told me to have fun doing it. And he works in my office at Northwell. He's a wonderful young man. He happens to be Orthodox, so he cannot come on tonight. Okay, full screen. Right, there it is.
Can you all see that?
Everybody could see it?
Yes.
Great. Why don't you move? Okay. Okay, we'll hope. Yeah. So I'm really proud tonight to give you a photographic journey of our travels. We were really blessed with so many people on the bus, about 20 of us, but of course, as you all know in this room, being with Rabbi Tara for 5 days was a true blessing. And then we had this wonderful tour guide, Scott Freed. I have to give credit to him as an unbelievable person who was really the formal guide. Tara was our spiritual guide, and really thank Scott, who's not here tonight, for this journey. As it says here that I'm a white privileged woman who values her Judaism in pursuit of social justice in both my personal and professional lives. We are trying at work to do this new location of self every time we open a meeting or have a group of students together or faculty, so I decided to introduce you to that tonight as well. And I hope you enjoy this image on the screen.
So I think maybe just click on
Just,
each one.
okay, okay, got it. So for all of you who don't know, we did start in Atlanta. We arrived at the airport in Atlanta, and that's where most of us met. A few of us met in other locations. And by chance, there was a John Lewis tribute wall in the Atlanta airport. Just by chance, they were having an exhibit. And I only gave you one image from that exhibit. It was really a beautiful exhibit with many, many quotes from John Lewis. And it was a wonderful, just opportune moment to see this. And he writes, as growing up in a family farm in rural Alabama, John Lewis began to question the justice of the segregated society he saw all around him. His mother urged, don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But at 15, inspired by action of Rosa Parks during the 1955 bus boycott, which you'll see, and the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, John was determined to get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. So that was really wonderful. So the same day we got on a bus and we ended up at the King Center. We started our journey from Atlanta and we ended up on Auburn Street. And Auburn Street is the birthplace of Martin Luther King, and Ebenezer Baptist Church is was done in 1927. And Martin Luther King Sr. became the pastor there, where Martin Luther King Jr. was baptized in 1960 and became a co-pastor with his father until his assassination in 68. I always describe the trip. We started where Martin Luther King was born and we ended where he died. So that was the journey and all in between. Then we proceeded to go to the burial site of Martin Luther King, and you could see him with his wife, Coretta Scott King, who died many years after him. And this is a beautiful memorial, a burial site here, beautiful water really spectacular. There was a whole wall of quotes, which I didn't get into the PowerPoint because I'm limited, but really spectacular memorial site for that. Then we started to go to Sweet Home, Alabama, and we continued our trip to Alabama. And this is all, I think this is all the same day, right? I'm getting lost a little, yeah. Yeah, we went, it was all the same day. So it was a very long day this day, to say the least. It was a long day. And this is me with my sister who journeyed with me on this trip, which was really a gift of a lifelong experience together. And we ended up at this sign where we stopped, of course, welcome to Sweet Home, Alabama. It was a rest stop. And then we proceeded that afternoon to a park, Freedom Park, which is a very famous park with many, many iconic sculptures and stories. I'm only capturing this wonderful man who met us there, Calvin Wallace Woods, Sr. He's 88, and he lived during the time of the civil rights movement in this park, and he was actually quite close to Martin Luther King, and he actually drove Martin Luther King to the airport when he went to Memphis after being in the park with Calvin, and that he was the last person to speak to Martin Luther King before he got to Memphis. And when I asked him what was the last thing King said to him, he actually said, he told me to keep doing the work we're doing, which was nonviolent civil rights. And that's what he said. Calvin is, somewhat like a Holocaust survivor in the sense he's 88 and people like him are just not going to be around. So meeting him was just a treasure in his stories. It was really unbelievable. These are some statues in the park. I really forgot my American history when I was on this tour. I realized maybe I wasn't listening in those classes in Lawrence Middle School and high school where I grew up. But dogs were attacking children and people, and that was a big thing. So there's many statues related to the dogs. I only gave you one image with the dogs, and of course a police person, and then the attack on a African-American woman. I think that's a woman. And over here is these 4 girls. These 4 girls' structure is called the Four Spirit statue, designed by Elizabeth McQueen, and it's in the park in Birmingham, depicting the 4 victims of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which is right across from the park. And this statue is in the park. It's really, it's 4 beautiful young women who lost their lives at this bombing at the church. Okay, those were the 2 days, and then we ended up here in our next stop in Selma, Alabama. Selma, Alabama makes, it's so impoverished, it's hard to describe what it looks like. It is not recovered at all, and it's very, very impoverished, and obviously was a lot of history there. So here we are at the chapel here, the Brown Chapel in Selma, Alabama, where, of course, worship happened. And this is Joanne Bland. Joanne Bland, I would say she's 66, 68. We never asked her exact age. And she was 11 with her sister who was 15, and they walked across the bridge together during the walk across the bridge from Birmingham to Memphis. So she was really an icon in that community, and she's lived there her whole life and trying to rebuild the I Have a Dream of Martin Luther King and bring Selma alive. So really quite moving. We spent a long time with her, and she, of course, took us all through Selma, which there's not much to see but poverty, and then she took us to the bridge. So here's the bridge, the famous bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which where the walk started and went on for, I think it was, how many, 4 days? 5 days, 5 days, thanks. So this was a very monumental experience there. Okay. What happened? What do you think happened? We were doing, this happened to me yesterday when I was giving a keynote in Texas. I'm so used to it. Right there we are. 13. Go back one. Right there. Oh, we did that. Okay, right. Okay. Okay. So then we go to Montgomery. and we get to Montgomery, and we go to the Rosa Parks Museum. So the Rosa Parks Museum, of course, is in memory of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, which was another piece of history that was brought back to my memory. And really, the museum is very interactive. It's incredible. You know, we spent too little time in every museum we went to. It was really an experience. And this is a statue of Rosa Parks and an image of the bus there in the background and the Montgomery bus boycott that led to the integration on the buses, which of course was monumental in the history of this period. Then we said, okay, what's next? So we went to the Civil Rights Memorial, which I luckily had this picture of us all standing around. You saw the weather was beautiful, by the way, if you don't notice. The weather was gorgeous every day for us. And here we have the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is doing so much work. And then we ended up on the next day with the Equal Justice Initiative Lynching Memorial, which, you know, it's hard to describe this experience, you know, somewhat when you go to Yad Vashem in Israel, of course, this experience, and I don't know if you could see on the bottom of every one of these statues or sculptures, they're really representing coffins. There is a county that had lynchings. And there's so many of these, and they're hoping that these go back to the counties where they are signifying, and that those counties make a memorial of the lynching that happened in those counties. So it's a remembrance in every county. From all over the country, right, not just that area. So, I mean, there's, I don't know, hundreds of these. I didn't count how many, obviously. I just want to show you this little picture right here. I went to Nashville after the trip, and I found the plaque where they buried the coffin, and this is the plaque in Nashville that they put up at this church to remember the lynchings that happened in Davidson County, which is where Nashville is. So it's this whole going back, and this is really for the hanged and the beaten, for the shot, drowned, and burned. Okay. At this memorial, there's tons of many statues and of slavery and Monument Park, really incredible visuals to bring us there. And the last stop we did, well, the next to last stop, but the last stop part of this trip was, of course, ending up at the Civil Rights Museum, where which is where the Lorraine Hotel is, where Martin Luther King was killed. So they have formed a civil rights museum there, and this is, in the museum, one of the most moving things for me is they had a video of Martin Luther King when he decided to go to Memphis to help with the garbage strike that was about to happen from the garbage men who was severely, you know, discriminated against and underpaid. And he went and he gave, "I've been to the mountain" speech. And there's a video of him giving that. I took a video, but I don't have time to show it to you, but I suggest you go on YouTube and listen to that "I have a mountain" speech, because he wrote, "I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place." And then he went back to the hotel and he was killed. Like he had this premonition the way he spoke that night. It was really very moving and riveting, I should say. And then what happened? We did that. And then the last stop, because of course we never want to stop, they said, "Well, do you want to do one more thing?" And we said yes, and this is our last stop, and it's called "I Am a Man." And this is a dedication to the sanitation workers that Martin Luther King went there to represent them and the rights they should have, because they had no rights, and they were asking for $1 pay raise, $1. And this "I Am a Man" statue is in memory of them. So the last thing I want to say is I bought this journal. It's a whole nother story, but I did buy this journal. And the quote I want to end with from Martin Luther King is, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." So I'm going to leave you with that tonight, with Martin Luther King's quote. And thank you. Thank you.
So as you can see, thank you, Alice, we're trying to accomplish a lot. Because I want to give you a taste of this experience even as we're praying. So we're gonna keep doing that, but to be able to start with those images in your head, we'll put all the other reflections in context. And really that's what prayer is, helping us to integrate the experiences that we've had. Let's continue on page 14. Wait, am I giving the right page for Zamru? Zamru Ladonai Bechinor. Where are we? 16, thank you. Zamru Ladonai Bechinor. Bechinor. Bekol Zimra. Zamru Ladonai Bechinor. Bechinor. Bechol Zimra. Zamru Ladonai Bechinor. Bechinor. Bechol Zimra. Zamru Ladonai Bechinor. Bechinor. Bechol Zimra. What do you have next, Andrew? What's the name? Or Zarua La Tzadik Uli Yishrelev Simcha. Going back to 14 at the bottom, this beautiful idea that light is sown for the righteous. Or Zarua La Tzadik Uli Yishrelev Simcha. Back to the beginning. O Zarua La Tzadik Hu Yisrael Simcha. And turning to page 18, but I need to feel some energy from you. You feeling sleepy? I need some energy. There's a lot of words here. Havu Ladonai. Mizmor LaDavid. Havu Ladonai b'nei Elim. Havu Ladonai kavod va'oz. Havu Ladonai kavod shemo. Ishtachavu Ladonai behadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai al hamayim el hakavod hirim. Adonai al mayim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach. Kol Adonai behadar. Kol Adonai שובר ארזים, וישבר אדוני את ארזי הלבנון. וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון וסירון כמו בן אלים. 19 at the bottom. Adonai oz לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Ya la 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 la. Okay, Mark, your turn.
I would like to preface my comments by thanking Rabbi Tara for putting this trip together and persevering to see it to fruition. It was so meaningful to me, especially as Dr. King was a hero of mine. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated less than 5 years after I participated in the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. We all have an image of slavery and slaves. They could be working in the plantation fields, or for that matter, also small farms, in the homes and mansions as cooks or domestics, in factories turning out goods at all levels of expertise, in construction and as stonemasons and carvers. Slaves were used to build the United States Capitol and the White House, as well as other federal buildings in Washington, D.C., and in cities all over the North and South alike. We do not as readily imagine the newly captured Africans and their being on the slave ships which brought them to our shores. They're being cramped into the holds of the slave transports in intolerable conditions. Their fears of their unknown future. Between 1525 and 1866, in the entire history of the slave trade, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World, of which 1.8 died on the ships and were tossed into the Atlantic Ocean. The destinations of these ships were North America, the Caribbean, and South America. A shade under 400,000 were shipped directly to North America. By 1860 in the United States, there were about 4 million blacks, 3.5 million slaves, and about 500,000 free. In Montgomery, Alabama, at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Equal Justice Initiative's The Legacy Museum is dedicated to the memory of the 4,400 black men who were lynched between 1877 and 1950, and the more current injustice of mass incarceration. Before entering the brilliantly designed museum exhibit, which is dedicated to those lynched black men with documented names and dates, there is a sculpture exhibit along the zigzag path to the exhibit entrance. Sometimes we view art and appreciate the beauty of it. For example, Michelangelo's David, but not raw emotion. Viewing a piece of art is all personal and very subjective. We all see different things and react accordingly. A sculptor from Ghana, Kwame Akoto Bamfo's sculpture of 6 newly captured blacks captures the raw emotions of the fear, the sorrow, the terror of 3 men and 3 women chained together with rusty chains, all in different poses. Looking at and studying the sculpture being brings up emotions which I find hard to put into words. The rusting chains and manacles around the necks and wrists and ankles of these proud blacks. The facial expressions which denote fear of the unknown, but also the strength of the human spirit. There are 6 sculptures put together by chains. One muscular man is standing tall and erect, exhibiting pride and defiance. One woman is full-bosomed and obviously nursing, holding an infant and reaching out to the muscular man. One very pregnant woman is squatting as though she is about to deliver her child right there. One man is on his knees with his hands chained behind his back. One young woman or teenage girl with arms chained behind her trying to get up. And one young man trying to walk and stand up straight. There is not much more that I can say except that I recommend all of you to go to Montgomery, Alabama, and see the sculpture for yourself, as well as the fabulous museum. Again, Tara, if not for you, I would never have been a witness to this sculpture and the Legacy Museum. Thank you.
Whoa, sorry, the stairs are treacherous. Everyone be careful. So Mark is passing around some of those images. Again, as I said, we're taking it in and then returning to prayer and taking it in. It's a dance we're doing tonight, but it's a sacred dance. So we move into Lecha Dodi. We're on page 20.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala Penei Shabbat nekabela Lecha Dodi likrat kala Penei Shabbat nekabela Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad Ishmi'anu Elam yuchad Adonai echad Shemo echad l'shemo tiferet v'helitila lecha dodi lekrat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi lekrat kala b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Verse 2 likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסוכה סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לך דודי לקראת קלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת קלה Pene Shabbat nekabela. Verse 5 Hitoreri ki ba'orech kumi uri shir daberi kavod Adonai alayik nigla lecha dodi likrat kala Pene Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala Pene Shabbat nekabela. If it's your practice, rise and face the door. Bawi v'shalom ateret b'ala gam b'simcha u'v'tola toch emunei Am segula Bo'i chala Lecha dodi Likrat kala Pene Shabbat nekabela Lecha dodi Likrat kala Pene Shabbat nekabela.
22, Psalm 92. Singing a song of Shabbat. Oh, we're doing Tzadikat Tamar. Okay, great. Down at the bottom, the indented paragraph. Tzadikat Tamar yifrach keherez balvanon yizgeh shetulim beveit Adonai bechatrot Eloheinu yadrichu od yanuvun beseva teshenim rananim yehu lehagid ki hashar Adonai be'atrat Eloheinu ya'alata bo. Okay, I think I messed up that last night. Okay, we are now calling up Barbara Hirsch, for a few thoughts.
So before I begin what I've written, I really, again, want to be another person who thanks Tara, because there was a lot of up and down. Would we make the trip? Would there be enough people? Thank you for your perseverance in that regard. Okay, so I'm going to share some lines from Langston Hughes' poem, Let America Be America Again. You have a copy of it, to express some reflections about the trip. I would encourage everyone to read this poem in its entirety. You have it with your pamphlet. The civil rights trip brought us all face to face with a journey in American history that has been disturbing and has many ugly elements that we all must grapple with. I was constantly aware, had we taken this trip 5 years ago, our lens might have been more optimistic after we had completed 2 terms of the first American Black president. It was very painful to realize that many of the realities of the civil rights journey deal with human beings being denied their dignity and free will. Some of the advances we thought we made in years past feel less solid now. Some reflections with the help of the poem. I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. In point of fact, we learned at the Lynching Museum, Mark brought this up, in Montgomery, Alabama, that Black people were brought against their will to America. Many died on the perilous journey, and those that arrived safely were sold off as slaves. They had no choice in what would be their home. I am the man who's never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years. This poem was written in the 60s, and we struggle with the notion that despite our progress forward, wage and educational inequality are huge challenges, and voter struggles are by no means a thing of the past. We must understand the privileges we have been afforded and the challenges we have never been forced to face. For I'm the one who was left dark island shore and Poland's plain and England's grassy lea, and torn from Black Africa's strand, I came to build a homeland of the free. This sentence reminds us that the civil rights struggle is not limited to the question of race. It can be applied to anyone who has been the other, the immigrant, the new one, the different one, the Jew, the woman, the queer, the disabled. We must confront why the other terrifies, alienates, and makes the history of humanity so filled with stories of hate and despair. We must question our own fear and attitudes about the other. Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream in the old world while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true. At many stops, we met many individuals who were involved in the movement, such as Bishop Calvin Wallace Woods, who Alice mentioned, who worked with Dr. King to organize protests against segregation and many other activities. Bishop Woods inspired us with his passion and commitment. It is the commitment of such individuals that make the changes in this country happen. It is this passion that we must keep in our hearts today and realize democracy is a constant work in progress. We cannot be complacent. We cannot take it for granted. We must work hard to keep our values and voices heard. We must all find a way to work to keep democracy alive, especially now when so many basic freedoms are being challenged. This was the key take home to me. We need to keep fighting if we want to move notions of human dignity and freedom forward. We cannot take anything for granted. So in closing, I'm going to just cite 2 paragraphs from Bret Stephens' piece, op-ed piece this past May 11th, 2 days ago. Can we be optimistic about America? Which brings me, this is his quote, which brings me back to the United States. Just as dictatorships advertise their strengths but hide their weaknesses, both to others and to themselves, democracies do the opposite. We obsess over our weaknesses even as we forget our formidable strengths. It is the source of our pessimism, but it is also, paradoxically, our deepest strength. In refusing to look away from our flaws, we not only acknowledge, but we have also begun to fix them. We rethink, we adapt. In bending, we find new ways to grow. We have demonstrated record of defanging right-wing demagogues, debunking left-wing ideologues, promoting racial justice, reversing crime waves, revitalizing the political center, and reinvigorating the American ideal. Our problem may be hard, but they are neither insoluble nor new. Those without our freedoms will not be so fortunate. Thank you very much.
Shalom Aleichem is on 24.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bachem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bachuni L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Paul.
Everyone else has thanked Tara, but I'd also like to thank Tara for her relentless pursuit of this life-altering experiences. Quite remarkable. I surely had a sanitized view of American history. I attended public schools in Baldwin, learned that our forefathers captured African citizens, brought them to the United States by ship, and enslaved our fellow humans of the world. Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War ended this, and the evil period in our country's history was gone. How wrong I was. The election of a black man as president of the United States peeled the scab off a festering wound in our country. people throughout the United States with racist philosophies and yearnings to preserve the supremacy of whites over blacks and brown citizens of the United States were energized. Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War when the federal government stationed soldiers in the South to preserve the freedoms of recently freed slaves, ended through legislation and judicial rulings and was followed by Jim Crow. Our federal and local governments and the judiciary supported and approved discrimination and racism. The Charlottesville March and our president's response that there are, quote, good people on both sides was outrageous and further energized and condoned Americans with racist views. These events have also generated an awakening of many of us who are cognizant of ongoing racism and discrimination, but weren't speaking out and supporting our fellow citizens as forcefully as we should have been. Confederate statues began to come down and government buildings were renamed. Sadly, none of this occurred without a fight. Fierce debates ensued among the public and our elected representatives to preserve these symbols. From my naive perspective, removing any symbol that honored any leader in the Confederacy made sense. Why should we have statues immortalizing Confederate leaders who fought for slavery? Why should United States military installations be named after Confederate generals? Why should schools be named after Confederate soldiers and leaders? Walking through the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and the Legacy Museum changed my simple, it made sense, to crystallizing the absurdity and inhumanity of these symbols of hate still exist in our country. Since the end of Reconstruction, terrorism and the murder of more than 4,000 black and brown citizens continued until the 1960s with blatant government support or simply looking the other way. Legal rulings have preserved structural racism, and by design, our jury system has been stacked against any black defendant. Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina celebrate Confederates Memorial Day a couple weeks ago as an official state holiday. Children attending these events are being taught to honor individuals in American history who fought to enslave people. The pain is palpable that these Confederate symbols have for our fellow citizens who are black and brown. It is painfully palpable to me. No one in this room would ever tolerate a Germany where statues in the village squares memorialize the contributions of Hitler, Eichmann, Himmler, or Mengele to German society. All of us in this room and on Zoom are acutely aware and afraid of the rise in anti-Semitism, locally and around the world. My children were concerned that I'd be wearing a kippah on our civil rights tour. The fear we all feel and the angst we have for Jews around the world is experienced every day by our black and brown fellow citizens in the United States of America. The ever-present names and symbols of the Confederacy in our country produce fear and pain in our fellow citizens. Our civil rights tour vividly taught these lessons and the ethical imperative that all Americans protest these symbols and fight to remove any vestige honoring Confederate soldiers or leaders. I'm hopeful that our wonderful Temple Beth-El community will join forces locally and nationally to teach the insidious effects of implicit bias and fight for an end to structural racism and judicial injustice and relentlessly work to create an equitable society. We are all made in the image of God, and every citizen of the world deserves unwavering love and respect. I long for the day when Martin Luther King's dream comes true. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Shabbat Shalom.
The Amidah begins on 28. If you're able to rise, please do so. Sorry, the Baruch Hu. It's a long, we're drawing out the liturgy. Please rise.
Ya la 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 la, 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 ya la 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 la. Baruch Hu et Adonai Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed Le'olam Va'ed Yalla lay 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 Yalla lay lay lay.
Together on 31, this is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim. And let's join in one more reading on the top of 33, and after that, we'll be going right to Shema. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. 34.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. You may be seated. 36. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Calling up Lisa.
These past few years have been brutal. At times it has been a challenge just getting through each day, never mind thinking about the future. So when the opportunity arose for the TBE civil rights trip many months in the future, we couldn't imagine committing to go. But then again, we couldn't imagine not going. And so our journey began. It came close to canceling multiple times, but with the commitment, hard work, and perseverance of all involved, we made it happen. Thank you, Tara. We weren't sure exactly what to expect, but we knew we wanted it to be a family trip. We were the only foursome of the group, and Matthew, our 13-year-old, was by far the youngest. Prior to the trip, I had witnessed blatant racism growing up in Howard Beach, and having worked in a city hospital throughout the pandemic, Maurice and I both witnessed the devastating effects of healthcare disparities, how people of color suffered disproportionately from the pandemic. We try to teach our boys about how inequality still exists today as they learned history in the comfort of integrated, ethnically diverse public schools. But with all that we thought we knew and wanted to pass on to our children, I don't think anything could have prepared us for the extent of what Paul called the palpable pain of racism that was pervasive throughout our trip. As a social worker, I've helped many patients process pain and trauma. And the one thing that always stands out in the healing process is hope. So the nagging question that remained with me during the trip was, how do I hold on to hope in the face of such cruelty in history and the divisive nature of our present? I got that answer in Selma, Alabama. After an exhausting few days, we got back on the bus. Our tour guide tried to warn us about our next speaker. He called her a force and said, "Please just do what she tells you to do." After Joanne Bland boarded our bus, she began telling her story. Her work as a freedom fighter began as a child seeing a white girl eating ice cream at a counter where blacks were not allowed. By the time she was 11, she had been arrested at least 13 times and witnessed brutality by police during peaceful marches, even against her own 14-year-old sister. As we went outside and walked through Selma, she continued. She spoke about the decline of Selma since that historic time when she marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the white flight, and the subsequent deterioration of the city, the racist policies that keep violence, poverty, drugs, boarded up houses, and joblessness in that once beautiful and dynamic town. Trying to relate to our experience back home, I asked how the pandemic affected her town, and she just stared. And then she said, "Terrible, there's no health care here." During one stop, she asked us, each one of us, to take a small rock from the ground and hold it up, saying, "I am making history." The rocks were from the ground that the giants stood on. She wanted us to have a piece of this town to remember, to keep visible, and make history ourselves. She turned her attention to me. Apparently, I got her rock, the one she stood on, and held my hand tightly. She whispered her pleas to me, not so quietly, for support in the fight. So I am speaking here today, making history, holding on tightly to that rock. Watching Miss Bland speak, I couldn't help but wonder how she continues to fight after all these years, how she stayed in Selma and continues to try to build it back up. How can she still hold on to hope? Later, sitting around her in a circle as she continued to share stories, she asked if anyone had any questions. I raised my hand because I was afraid of her response if I spoke out of turn. "Do you still have hope that things will change?" "How?" She just pointed to my children. And after a long pause, she said, "They are the future. They are my hope. They will carry on the work and make it better." Then I understood why it needed to be a family trip. My boys will be history makers. Thank you.
Mi chamocha is, the song when we've passed through the sea and it was all great. We're not there yet, so we're going to offer just a reading, a more somber reading on 41. Sing the song, or well, maybe it could be joyous, but we can't say it joyously yet. Sing the song of men and women, joined in understanding and respect. The song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, the song of peace. Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Israel. And as we offer the Hashkivenu prayer on 42, I'm acknowledging that it's been a very difficult day in Jerusalem, a tragic day in Jerusalem, difficult. So a special prayer for peace there. Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom Vehamidenu shomreinu lechai Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom Vehamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Third line. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Down to the bottom. Baruch atah Adonai Haporis Sukat Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al kol Yerushalayim. We are now at the Amidah, rising in body or spirit, 46. We're actually going to skip a Shabbos since we're running late. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufia gita hilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. 48. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Bimotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ve'ezrat Sarah. 50. Atah gibor leolam Adonai Mechayeh hakol atah Rav lechoshia Morid hatal Mechalkel chayim bechesed Mechayeh hakol ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, הוא מתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדומה לך. מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה הכל. 52.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש, האל הקדוש. Continuing with a few moments of our own private prayer, seated or standing. Encouraging those who are davening to continue to do so as we bridge to our prayer for healing, offering all those names in the silence of our hearts. Mishaberach is on 253. Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor HaBaracha May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Matt.
I think it was cooler in Memphis. Sorry. I want to thank Rabbi Tara, of course, and Jackie for the work putting things together. We can't forget about Jackie. I also want to mention that I was very fortunate, I guess hopefully we were fortunate, that my sister-in-law Rebecca and her friend Kelly were also able to attend the trip, and they really just had a wonderful time, and they are so happy that Beth-El, that this trip allowed them to come. After our trip, I was on such a wonderful high. I repeatedly inundated Alex, the girls, and pretty much anyone else who'd listen, anyone else about what we saw and who we met. I was full of many new fun facts I often provide the family at dinner time. This was a trip of a lifetime, as I have spent much of my life reading and studying American history. When I was in 9th grade, my social studies teacher, Marie Panos, showed the class the classic PBS civil rights documentary, Eyes on the Prize, and I've been fascinated ever since. On our recent trip, I finally got to see, hear, and even walk in the footsteps of the heroes of the civil rights era who fought, suffered, and died, fighting back against 350 years of oppression and degradation. We stood where those battles took place. Like other historical battle sites like Gettysburg, Antietam, or Normandy, the battle sites in the civil rights movement, the Pettus Bridge, the Brown Chapel AME Church, Freedom Park, and others, saw pain and suffering, victory and loss. But unlike those other backgrounds, those we saw are part of a struggle that started centuries ago and continues with the same intensity today, seemingly without end. Sadly, much of the gains made by the legislation passed through the outrage against racial Southern violence, like the 1965 Voting Rights Act, are under assault by yet another generation of the white majority power structure. One of the reasons this struggle has no end is because so few Americans know their own history. In the post-war South, former Confederates and their descendants wove myths of a glorious lost cause where the civil rights was fought not for slavery, but for states' rights and another way of life. For their way of life. Americans for generations learned misleading, biased, and outright false history in order to absolve themselves of the sin of slavery, racial segregation, and discrimination. We must unlearn what we have learned and start over. That's why the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum and the National Civil Rights Museum we visited are so important. For many, this might be the introduction to a thorough view of the African American experience here in North America. Walking through the enormous breadth of information, I saw both white and black families, many with their children, taking it all in. It may have been their first time seeing a truer version of American history laid out in a continuum from 1619 through today. Despite how enriching and engaging our travels were, I do believe there's an important downside to the trip. As a New Yorker, it's easy to point at southern states and judge. This is where Jim Crow was. This is where the segregated bus stations, lunch counters, and schools were. This is where Bull Connor and Sheriff Jim Clark and George Wallace were. That's where the terrible lynchings took place. This is clearly a Southern problem. But is this just another lie we teach ourselves? The Dutch brought the first slaves to New Amsterdam in 1627. New England Puritans owned sugar plantations and slaves in Barbados. Wall Street was second only to Charleston as an auction site for slaves. In 1790, 20% of the population of North Hempstead, here, was African American slaves. More than 50 years after the 1968 Fair Housing Act, Long Island, through redlining and other discrimination, is one of the most segregated parts of the United States. So this is where we go from here. We need to ask more questions. We need to unlearn our New York history to understand the role of slavery and segregation here. For me, this wonderful trip with really wonderful people, seeing and hearing so much, fulfilled an important desire to experience firsthand an important chapter in our history. It has inspired me to keep learning new things, but this time right here at home. Thank you.
So we need to wind this service down. I'll offer one really just very simple closing thought. So we had this magnificent Holiness Code Kiddushim last week. This week's Parshat and more. It's very focused on the priests, on rituals, on the calendar. It's all the religious stuff. And then stuck in at the end, we have this commandment to not take the edges of our field, to leave them for the poor. Uvkutzrechem et ketziratzachem, when you reap the harvest of your land, lo techale pa'at sadcha, don't reap all the way to the edges, leave them. But we already said that last week. So why? To me, that it means whatever we're doing, building our institutions, having our Shabbat services, doing the religious stuff and the day-to-day stuff, that we can't forget the ethical piece. Even when we're in the middle of the long thing about the priest, remember the poor. And then there's something about boundaries, and I really owe this particular insight to Nina Koppelman at Morning Minyan this week. She was saying, it's interesting. Why choose the edges? Why talk about the edges? I think because this commandment is reminding us that we have to go up to the boundary, to the edge of our experience, and peek into something we don't quite understand. We did that in our civil rights journey, and we can do that right here every day, just a little to the edges of our comfort level to behold the other. The other thing it teaches me is that we like to draw lines. But you know what? The edges of the field, it's not really clear. Who does that belong to, us or them? To me, what this trip was about was about reminding me that the lines I've drawn, oh, that was the South. We're in the North, as Matt just said. Oh, that was, slavery was then. We've moved on. Those lines, they actually are blurry. So we leave the edges of the field to remember that the lines we have drawn may not be so clear. And lastly, the thing about leaving the edges of the field, the thing I love about this mitzvah is it means that the poor can come in their own time and in their own way and get what they need. We're giving them dignity. And so this 28th day of the Omer is what we count tonight. And we're supposed to think about Netzach. It's the end of the week when we think about having fortitude, and God knows we need fortitude to make societal change. That's Netzach. But tonight we think about Malchut b'Netzach, dignity in endurance. So may we continue to grow, to push our boundaries, to look at those who are on the other side of the boundary, to question the lines we may have drawn, and may we have endurance as we do that. And may we do that work in ways that gives our community dignity, but most important, that dignifies those with whom we share this country and this community. And so I invite us now to count the Omer together. We are on page 278. And before we say the bracha, perhaps pick one gem, one insight, one picture that came to you from the reflections tonight, and hold it with you as we continue our journey of Malchut Shabanetzach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat hayom haomer. Hayom 18 yom shehem 4 shavuot ba'omer. Today is 28 days, which is 4 weeks of the Omer. We're getting there. We're getting there on our journey. Let us rise for Aleinu. We are on 282. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגובה מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. 287. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו echad. You may be seated. As we prepare for Kaddish, it's certainly worth noting that it was this week that the United States marked the 1 millionth death due to COVID-19. If you hear the name of someone you've come to remember, please rise when you hear that name and remain standing. This week marks the passing of Michael Schutzel and Michael Tucker. And in the past 30 days, Lenore Miskin and Edith Silverstein. And the Yortsites this week for Lila Carr, Jeffrey Cohen, Sidney Fink, Alex Ginsberg, Barbara Harnick, Harris Harnick, Harvey Harnick, Michael Seth Heller, Emil Hirsch, Nathan Crown, Greta Liebach, Carmine Morrow, Hans Monaster, Natalie Polevsky, Alan Schneider, Rebecca Siegel, Brian Wheeler, Lorraine Wallen, Ada Wallner, Paul Wallner, and Tina Tonorezos. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Are there any other names omitted or mispronounced? Please utter them aloud. If it's your custom to rise for Mourner's Kaddish, please do so. We're on 294. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemeraba bi'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv yimru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemed kudsha b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata ta'amiran bi'alma v'yimru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. May the one who creates harmony and peace on high bring that to all of us, to all Israel, to all humanity. We say it one last time. Amen. You may be seated. Okay. Thank you so much, Andrew. You're a quick study. Thank you. And let's see. Tomorrow morning, Torah study as always, online and in person. This Sunday will be the Rabbinic Dialogue over at Great Neck Synagogue. You can join in person or online. And there'll be some bagels before. The dialogue will start in earnest at 10. Hebrew Grammar with David Wolf, Thursday, May 19th, 8 p.m. That's continuing. And next Friday, we're going to start a little early at 6 p.m. Pizza, s'mores in honor of Lag BaOmer, that one happy day during the counting of the Omer. And we're going to be honoring our volunteers, so many of whom who are in this room, as well as David Wolf. So be sure to come to next Friday, the 20th, for some marshmallows, some pizza, and some community. Sunday, May 22nd is a Brotherhood Monthly meeting along with the Celebrate Israel Parade at 7:30 p.m. And our annual congregational meeting will be on May 31st. So let's see. Let us thank our Oneg bakers, Linda and Cheryl and Roberta and Donna and Sharon. We'll be having our Oneg in the atrium, which may even be a cool space. You never know. And we are going to close with Kiddush and Motzi. So could I have the trip participants up in a big huddle here, facing that way? We are on page 4. Everyone can rise. Actually, let me get you the words. And there's one version, you can hold them high. Raise up that cup. We are on page 4. Let's go to page 5. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה למקרא קודש, זכר לציאת מצרים. ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת לחיים. And let's have a challah lifter. You know who you are. Beautiful. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. There's a knife there if you want to cut it, or you can just tear, whatever your hygienic thoughts are. And we're going to sing Redemption Song because it's so good. And you've got it on your sheet. Oh, pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption song, redemption song. One more verse. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs, songs of freedom. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Take your siddur out with you. That'll help our wonderful usher, Phil. And thank you to our amazing speakers. You made the night.